Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What is a supernatural event that happened in your life that just cannot be explained? Part 2. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I don't know if I'd call it supernatural, but it was freaky, and I still don't understand. I was in the kitchen cleaning up, waiting for my kid's bus. I saw it pull up and saw him get off. He didn't come in, but he started playing around with hiding under the window to jump out at me and say boo. So I thought that's what he was doing. But I walked out and he wasn't there. I called his name and looked around the house thinking he was hiding from me, but I couldn't find him. I circled the house calling for him, and the parent panic set in. It probably only lasted 90 seconds, but it felt a lot longer. Then his bus pulled up and he got off. I shared this story a few times on Reddit, but no one seems to care. We do. I just wish I could show people firsthand how bizarre it really was. There's this place in my hometown called Old Town, which is an area they had to evacuate because a mine there, and it was made the area unsafe due to sinkholes and whatnot. I was in a class in middle school called Environmental Adventures, where you did outdoor stuff, and we went to Old Town to do some geocaching. While the class was walking, we saw an old lady on a rocking chair on a concrete foundation where a house used to be. She was dressed like an old-timey old lady, like Muriel from Courage the Cowardly Dog. She was rocking back and forth, talking to herself while she stared into the woods, not looking at us once. We found the geocache a little down the road, turned around, and her and the rocking chair disappeared. There was no way that she could have got away that fast, toting a rocking chair without us seeing her. We were only at the geocache for like 5 minutes. Confused everybody. Weirdest shit ever. Take it from me. If someone is determined to play golf, they will play golf, no matter what. I have two. One day, about 20 years ago, I came home from work to find my dad dead on the sofa. He was cold to the touch, but I still called 911 and tried to resuscitate him in case there was any chance that I was wrong. My grandparents lived down the street. Their house was always the gathering place. People came for a cup of coffee every day. My dad had suffered some brain injuries a few years prior, but had fully recovered and got sober, so his death was pretty unexpected. He was only 48. When the ambulance came roaring down the street, my grandmother said something along the lines of, "I hope that's not going to my son's house." My uncle was in the kitchen at the time and said, "Nah, your son is at the door." He had seen my dad looking in a window next to the door. Of course, he was gone by that time. Still gives me chills. The other one is not nearly as dramatic. My wife and I lived next door to a golf course. One morning, we were leaving at around 5 a.m. A golf cart with two guys crossed in front of us. Not dangerously close, but close. We remarked that it was pretty early for people to be out. I had never seen anybody out that early in the few years that I'd lived there. I looked over to my left, and they were nowhere to be seen. This was a very open parking lot. We stopped and looked back, but no trace of any golf cart or anyone in general. Thanks for attending my long-winded ghost conference. There are refreshments in the lobby. My cousin had struggled with depression his whole life, and a few years ago things came to a head. He was 100% convinced the only cure to his depression was suicide, that death was the only thing that would make him truly happy. We were close, so it hit pretty hard. After the funeral, my aunt told us that she had seen a helium-filled smiley face balloon kind of float in front of her, then stop, and it just kind of sat there for a minute. Then it flew up and away, out of sight, on its own. When she told us this, we kind of just brushed it off as a coincidence, but it kept happening to her over the next couple of weeks. We thought she was just recognizing patterns until I was at a music festival a few months later, and the exact same type of balloon, same color and everything, floated through my campsite and did the same thing, where it stopped on its own, stared at me, then kind of bobbed and flew up and away. I'm not really a believer in ghosts and the like, but I'm convinced in some shape or form that was my cousin telling us that he was finally happy. My dad killed my mom when I was 10. I'm now mid-30s. 2 years ago, I had lost my wedding ring. We looked everywhere. I even played back the security camera at work to see if I was wearing it when I left. I gave up finding it and was very upset. One night I had a dream. My mom woke up and said, "I know you've been looking for this. I love you. It'll be out here." In the morning, I was getting ready for work as usual, sat down on the couch. Right in front of me on the ottoman was my ring. I went to bed after my wife and she woke up after me. I used that ottoman the night before and there's no way the ring could have been there. Again, I checked our camera. We had been robbed once, so we kept the camera towards the front door. It could see our couch, and the ottoman had no ring when I went to bed. I still cry every now and then, remembering it. A couple years ago, my father's immediate family had a reunion in Minnesota. We stayed at a little cabin on a lake. Of course, sitting around the campfire, my uncle was telling us all of his ghost stories, which put me just a bit on edge. Later, when I went back to my room to go to sleep, I flipped off the light switch, and immediately both closet doors popped fully open. I lost my shit. I certainly would like to see that picture if possible. Back in 2010, my family and I lived in a really nice home out in the woods, and there was always weird things that happened in that home that were unexplainable. One day I was coming up the stairs from my basement, and as I rounded the corner, I saw a shadowy figure running up the stairs from the main floor to the top floor. I only saw it from the corner of my eye, and the figure was gone in an instant. Fast forward a couple of years, I had moved on to a college, and my parents decided they were going to sell the home and downsize. They had just got done repainting most of the walls, and I asked my cousin if she could take a picture so I could see how the new walls looked. She took the picture in the back of our living room facing the front of the house, which just so happened to have a staircase to the right, and in the picture was the same shadow I had seen years prior. She was the only one in the home when the picture was taken, and it looks like the shadow is looking right at you. I have the picture posted in my profile history if anyone wants to see it. A little late, but here goes. When I was in middle school, my grandparents were in charge of the local theater group, and were doing this musical show where people dressed up as old country stars and sang some songs. My grandma was the director, and my grandpa was in charge of technical stuff like lights and sound. Well, this particular showing was on Elvis Presley's birthday, and they had a little bit at the end where they sang happy birthday in all their costumes. Well, the show ends, and they're all doing curtain calls, and I'm sitting in the back with my grandpa while he's controlling the lights and sounds, when all of a sudden, Happy Birthday by the Beatles starts playing over the speakers. My grandpa looks confused and starts messing around with the sound machines and pressing buttons and dials, and my grandma runs back yelling at him, as that wasn't the song he was supposed to play. He then looks up and goes, "That's not me." And my grandma says, "What do you mean it's not you? Switch it to the right song." And he looks so confused and says, "We don't even have that song on the CD for this play. This isn't coming from our music." And my grandma just turns around and leaves. Whole song plays and ends when the curtain closes. No one in the crowd really noticed, and it seemed normal, but still freaks me out. No clue where the music was coming from, and we inspected the CD that all the music for the play was on, and that was currently in the computer playing music throughout the entire performance, and sure enough, that song was not on it. I still think the ghost of Elvis was there that night, lol, maybe. I was very young when all this happened, so I don't have the clearest memories of it, but in the room I grew up in, apparently I used to scream bloody murder all night because of the thing watching me in the room. I have very hazy memories of being comforted by my parents, and I can also remember the feeling I had of knowing I was being watched. Well, when my dad finally paid off the mortgage to the house and received the deed, we found out the last owner had died in that room. No idea if these events are connected, but whenever my husband has stayed in that house, he's always actively avoided that room, and I prefer to stay well away from it. My mom would show me the snow owl the winter before she passed. She'd say, "Did you see that owl? Come see the owl." We're native, and some natives believe that owls come before death. I was called just before 11 a.m. The police captain called to tell me that they were taking my mom into the hospital. She collapsed on her porch and was in a coma. I called a friend to take me. We waited, my brothers and sisters and I, and when the doc came in, he gave us the news. I listened to the prognosis, which was, if she came out of it, she'd be in a vegetative state. I felt like I just couldn't take any more. Everyone crying, all the chaos, and went downstairs to sit outside, process it all, I guess. Before I did that though, I kissed her on the forehead and said, "It's okay if you got to go." My sister heard me and said, "Don't leave us." As I was sitting alone outside the hospital, the parking lot turned into a bright blue, then white, and I saw my mother running down the ramp. I looked to where she was running and saw a bunch of people in an orange aura type of thing. I couldn't tell who they were, but I knew they were her friends. She saw me and came running towards me and said, "Give me a hug. I gotta go. I gave her a hug and said, "I know you do, Ma. I know you do." She ran towards the group, and then the vision was gone. The parking lot was back to normal. Right at that point, my friend came down and said, "You have to go upstairs. Your mom's taking her last breath." I looked at her and said, "My mom's already gone." Maybe my brain just couldn't take the overload and gave me a vision to handle the stress. I don't know. I had a habit of checking my watch and still do, and I noticed the time when I sat down. It was 1:10. When my friend came down, it was 1:20. Time noted on her death certificate, 1:16 p.m. A clod of red earth fell from above onto the widescreen of our car some years ago. The dust took a dozen or so swipes of the wipers to wet and remove, almost caused us to crash. It was dark out, and once our view was restored, we could see a dancing dog in the middle of the road, illuminated by the headlights. It was facing the car, swaying side to side on its left legs, then right, as if we were watching a rocking horse from the side. We reversed up the single lane, high-hedged country road until it was out of sight. Absolutely terrified us. I have quite a few actually, but one that happened pretty recently stands out. I grew up in a very rural area, mostly crop farms everywhere. About a mile from my parents' house, there was this old abandoned farmhouse that all the area kids said was haunted. They would sneak into the house after dark, all the typical stupid kid crap, but I believe there are things in this world better left alone and never went. Years passed. The house fell into disrepair and was eventually torn down, leaving an old weathered barn. Well, I make a little side money selling photos of abandoned places, so I wanted to take a picture of the barn. I parked on the road and was walking up the drive. I made it about 10 feet before I just could not walk any further. My feet wouldn't move forward. My adrenaline spiked and I burst into tears. So I turned back and ran to my car. I didn't feel safe until I got past a nearby creek you have to cross to get there. I let it go, but a few months later, we had to drive past the property after having Christmas dinner with my parents, and there was a creature standing in the drive. It reminded me of the faun from Pan's Labyrinth, just super tall with a wide head and horns or antlers, but the eyes were more on the side of the head. Again, adrenaline kicked in and I burst into tears, but I was trying to keep it together because I didn't want to freak out my kids. My husband asked if I was okay. I just said, "You saw that, right?" "Yep." "Was it human?" "Nope." I refused to drive that road ever again. I was out with my parents, and it was late coming back home. At around 2:30 a.m., we were at a traffic signal. A homeless guy comes up and knocks on the window of the seat where my mother was sitting. As she rolled down the window to give him money, he said, "Check what is happening at your brother's house." He proceeded to take the money and walked away, probably thinking that he was a bit crazy in the head. We didn't bother and went home. Next morning, Mom gets a call from her brother's wife. He has had a heart attack at 2:30 a.m. Not all harbingers bring ill tidings. I like this. I live in a city, and my brother lives in another city that is around 1,000 kilometers away. He visits sometimes, but not quite often, on an average of once every 2 years. On one day around 7 years ago, I was sleeping on the couch in the living room at my apartment. I woke up suddenly on my brother's sitting just beside me, and I was shocked and surprised, started greeting him and asking him about how he's doing and what pleasant surprise it was. Next thing I realized that this was a dream, as the doorbell was ringing, which woke me. I went to open the door, and guess what? It was my brother, who came to surprise us. This literally had me speechless. Don't have any explanation, and I think sometimes you don't need to have one. I love that. Working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance, and you had to check in at the security station to get in or out. A worker shows up and checks in, saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him, then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back, so I go patrol the building to find him and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turned the lights on for him. No other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stopped by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point, I went to check cameras to see where he went, but he's not on a single camera except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point, I logged it as an incident and GTFO right as the relief shift showed up. Next day, my boss calls me and says that a worker had been on vacation out of state for several days and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation to what happened.